Hey guys, I'm Elizabeth McCravey, a website designer and business coach for entrepreneurs and your host for the Breakthrough Brand podcast, the show that's all about pulling back the curtain on how to actually build a successful business. I don't skim the surface around here. If you want a deep dive into the nitty-gritty details of what it takes to run a successful business and stand out in a crowd, you're in the right place. After creating a multiple six-figure-a-year website design business in my 20s, I'm ready to share everything I've learned and everything I'm still learning because I believe the keys to building a thriving business should never be a secret. Here you'll find episodes that are actionable, direct, and fun, like friends chatting business over coffee, and a fresh, honest take on the reality of being an entrepreneur. If you're ready to master online marketing, branding, website design, mindset, and business strategy, then this is the podcast for you. It's time to build your breakthrough brand. Let's do this. Hey friends, welcome back to the Breakthrough Brand podcast. We're talking real estate investing again on this week's episode. Last week I had Adam on where we talked about updates to our real estate business and how we have 5 properties now. And we've grown it pretty quickly, about 5 properties in a 1.5 to 2 year period. And we've learned a lot in that time span, which is what I'm sharing about today. You guys know I'm all about sharing what works for me in my life and in my business. And that's exactly what we're doing in today's episode. We have 7 things that we've learned that we wish we knew at the beginning, but that we know now from these first years of real estate investing. It's the good, it's the bad, it's the ugly, with plenty of laughs along the way, some high level stuff, some super practical stuff, and some stuff you may have not thought about. If you're new here, I'm a website designer and business mentor. I have an online course for designers on how to build a successful and in-demand design business. And I also sell show it website templates. So raising my hand to say I'm not like a real estate investing educator by any means, and neither is my husband who I'm interviewing today. We are just normal people who do this as a side hustle, which I think there's so much power in hearing our experience with that being true, because we are just figuring it out, just like you might be if you're thinking about investing in real estate, or maybe, you're a few properties behind us and already doing it. But I do like to preface that, like, we're not major pros at this, but we are like in the trenches doing this, like part-time people, so to speak. And we've learned a lot, and it's been a really great thing for our marriage, great thing for our family, and great thing for our finances. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and whether you already invest in real estate or are just thinking about it, or think maybe, that could be something I'm interested in, there's definitely something for you here. So without further ado, here is my conversation with my husband, Adam. All right, guys, I'm sitting here with my wonderful husband, Adam, a much requested Breakthrough Brand podcast guest. So thanks for coming back, Adam.
We're back 1 week later.
Yes. And so, okay, if you missed last week's episode, I would say worth listening to, but you can also totally listen to this one without that context. In last week's episode, we talked, though, about an update in our properties, and Adam actually walked through the finances for an entire year on 3 of the properties, which was really cool and I think probably helpful to a lot of you guys. And now that we're going to get into like some just tips of things we've learned in real estate investing, what we wish we knew when we started that we know now, 5 properties later. And worth noting, because I always like kind of making note of this sort of thing, but like, we're obviously not real estate investing pros, which I actually think is part of why this might be helpful, though, because we are just like regular people with other types of jobs who are doing this as like a side thing. It's not our main thing. I'm not trying to start a course on real estate investing or anything like that. So this is not a prequel to that product launching. Although maybe some of you guys wish that would be a thing. Let me know if that's you, but that's not something whatsoever that we're planning on doing.
No,
but I do want to share all this with you guys because I think it's helpful and something for me personally that I've always felt pretty passionately about. Adam knows this, but like so much of business stuff and what business people teach is like, here's how to make money as a business owner, but then not enough people, in my opinion, talk about what you do with that money after, talking about things like tithing, investing, finances in general. And so I like to bring that up and be like, hey, here's what we are doing. And so this is a big part of what we're doing with the money that my business makes. So yeah, anything else to add before we get started on the first things?
No, I think that's a really good intro. I mean, if you listened to the last episode or if you didn't, it was more granular, like a very detail oriented, and hopefully that, I don't think that sounds boring. I think granular and details is fascinating.
Yeah.
But this one is more big picture, conceptual, high level, not as detail oriented.
Yeah, so we have 7 things we wish we knew then that we know now. Not really in any particular order, but I guess you could say this first one honestly might be the biggest. So Adam, tell us what the first...
I don't know if I would say that.
Oh, you don't say that?
These next 6 are pretty good.
Well, I meant I meant the one that's the most painful, maybe, is how I think about it.
Sure.
The most painful, not necessarily... Yeah, the most painful. Let's say that.
Potential for pain.
Potential for pain. Painful for us at times. So share what the first one is.
All right, number 1, finding good tenants is so important and hard.
Hard, stressful, time-consuming.
Yeah.
Makes you want to pull your hair out, tears, etc.
Totally. It can, and it can be a dream. Like, it can go both ways. But yes, if you're talking about potential pain points for what can really make this not fun, that's high up there. So, again, I know this is on the list of things that we're saying we didn't know then, or we know now that we wish we knew then. I mean, I think I knew this in theory. We knew this in theory, but we hadn't lived it. Now we've lived it. Mm-hmm. A couple things about this. We've never had trouble finding tenants. That's been, at least in the 2 years that we've been doing this across several different properties, that's been super easy. Like, there are at least...
We'd want it vacant longer, though, than we would have liked.
Yeah, which we're going to talk about that. But even in that case, we're talking about like 6 weeks, okay? Mm-hmm. It was a month and a half. So we have not had a hard time finding tenants. The real thing we're stressing here is finding good tenants. So today, do we want to walk through how many tenants we've had at each property?
Yeah, we can share that. Just maybe I'll share about a few of them. We have 5 properties if you missed that.
Yeah, we have 5 properties. 3 of them have been going for about 1.5 to 2 years. 2 of them have been going like half a year, like started this year.
Last year, but yeah.
Yeah, 2022. I mean, across all of them at this point, we've now probably worked with about 8 to 10 different tenants. I mean, the properties that all started earlier, most of them have had 2 tenants now at this point. People, in the second year of the lease, it was a different tenant, that kind of thing. So we've worked with maybe 8 to 10 different tenants. Most of them have been really great. Like, I don't want to come across as a person who's bashing the people who are renting properties from us. Most of them have been really great.
Yes.
Do you have something you want to say there?
No, I would agree with you. Like, I mean, literally, just to give one example, we were putting up our Christmas tree yesterday, and one of our tenants last Christmas, so not this Christmas, but the Christmas before, gave us handmade ornaments as like a Christmas gift to us. And we were taking those off the tree, and we're like, oh my gosh, these are from, we won't say his name, but like this was such a meaningful, special gift, and it's beautiful on our tree. They were like crocheted angels. So we've had a lot of tenants like that where it's like, wow, you're amazing, you're so kind. We've also had some difficult situations though with tenants, so it goes both ways. Yes.
So most people have really been fantastic. I don't mean to criticize any of those people, and I don't want to scare you. Most people have been fantastic. We've had 2 bad experiences. Like, across about 10 different people, there have been 2 that were bad experiences. To be clear, neither were catastrophes, and here's how I'm defining that. A catastrophe is someone who stiffs you on money. Okay, that is what you don't want, or someone who like.
Interrupting this episode with a suggestion for the small business owners listening. Ever wonder what you should do for healthcare when you and your spouse are both self-employed, so there's no work-provided health insurance to participate in? Well, when my husband Adam joined me in the entrepreneurial job space over 4 years ago, we joined Christian Healthcare Ministries instead of getting traditional health insurance. And it was the best decision for us, especially in these years of growing and raising a family while also running multiple businesses. CHM is a health cost-sharing ministry and is a faith-based alternative to health insurance. We did tons of research before choosing CHM, and if you know me and Adam, you know we are all about doing the math when making big or small financial decisions. And even though it's not insurance, CHM shares 100% of eligible medical bills, which is more than the typical 70 or 80% of medical bills paid for by insurance companies. All sharing is determined by the CHM guidelines, which you can check out before and after joining. And for the mamas and mamas to be listening, you truly cannot find a better healthcare option for maternity care. I had a vaginal delivery and a C-section and birth center care and hospital care between my 2 pregnancies and births, and it was all 100% shared for. And outside of birth, we've had our share of emergency room visits and procedures as a family, and those costs were all shared by members at Christian Healthcare Ministries, leaving us only paying our monthly contribution. CHM is less expensive month to month than insurance, and because there's no network, you can choose your care with whichever providers best fit your family. I seriously just cannot recommend Christian Healthcare Ministries enough. You've got to check them out. Go to elizabethmccravy.com/CHM for more information. Also putting that link in the show notes, elizabethmccravy.com/CHM. Now back to the episode. ruins your place.
Yeah, goes Breaking Bad and starts cooking crystal meth in your house or something. Neither of those things have happened, okay? I don't know of any meth labs in any of our houses, and nobody stiffed us on money. Like, to date, we have been paid all of the money that different, leases and deals said we should be paid. Didn't always come when it was supposed to come, but it's always come. So we have not had a catastrophe, but we have had 2 tenants that have caused a lot of work. Just have been more like headache, labor-intensive situations. So that's one thing that I now know. Like, we've chosen to self-manage because I've had the time to do that, and that obviously makes your profit margins look much better. And as a person who self-manages, there's really 2 things that I find myself doing. There's all the strategy, right? The big picture strategy and thinking about the business. But on the day in, day out, week in, week out work, there's 2 things that you do as a person who self-manages. Deal with any kind of repairs that need to be made. Somebody calls you and says something's wrong, and you either have to take care of it yourself or coordinate someone who can. And tenant stuff, just managing tenants, like making sure they have everything they need, that they're happy, getting money from them, working with them when they're going to be late on rent or something like that. So that's kind of the 2 things that make up all the work. And man, the managing difficult tenants thing, it can just shoot the work way through the ceiling. So what's funny about the 2 tenants who have been a little bit more difficult, credit scores could not predict that.
That's a good point.
Neither could their financial status. So I just want to say, and we'll talk a little bit about how I think you go about getting a good tenant, but I just want to say from the front end, it is not all about making sure that the person has a good job and a good credit score.
Which, if you're new to real estate investing, that might not make as much sense about why you're saying that, but it's very common advice that just look at the credit score, look that they have enough money according to their W-2 that they can pay you for
pay
this.
Stub or
pay
bank
stub. I mean, that they can pay you, and then that's that.
Yeah.
But that's not always that.
And let me be clear. I'm not saying don't do those things. Okay, yes, you do want to run a credit report, and you do want to verify income to make sure that they can pay the rent. So all that stuff is important. But what I'm really trying to say is good tenant, bad tenant is not just a people with more money, people with less money kind of thing. I'm just going to say it from my perspective. The worst tenant we've ever had also happened to be the richest tenant we've ever had. Like, the person who's given me the most trouble is also the person who had the most money of anyone we've ever rented to and had a fantastic credit score, 700 plus, and plenty of money in the bank. And what was so difficult about them was they were so needy. And we don't have to get into the details of it, but I'm being honest with you that we are good landlords who maintain properties and fulfill our end of the agreement and provide a space that the person renting it is entitled to. These people were going above and beyond that and imposing on our kindness in some ways. There were signs in the beginning that could have told me that was the type of person we were getting into a deal with, and I ignored those signs. I blew right past them, honestly, because of the money. These people were going to pay very high rent.
Which might even go back to why they were more intense, even, that they realized the rent was higher.
Totally. Yeah, there's a lot to be said about that.
Here, finish what you were saying there. I have something to add to what you're saying to talk about.
Here's the big picture takeaway I'm trying to make. The credit score and the financial status cannot tell you alone whether or not this is a good tenant. There's this other thing that has to be involved called your gut. Like, you've got to listen to it, you've got to trust it. On the 2 less than ideal tenants that we've had, there were signs that this was not going to be a good experience. I can look back on those experiences and know that really my gut was telling me not to do it, and I ignored that for various reasons. Like in the example that I just gave you, honestly, the money. I chose the money over what my gut was telling me. That's a mistake. So here's the takeaway, like, run the credit scores and all that kind of stuff, but talk to the person, interview them, be in a room with them, be in tune with how you feel about them, like what your body and your intuition is telling you about them. Going to bring in some mental health here because I'm a therapist. Your gut is never wrong, okay? Like, your brain can absolutely be wrong because your brain does this really cool thing called justifying and rationalizing, and your brain can play tricks on itself and talk you into whatever you're trying to talk yourself into. Your gut does not lie. Like, if you can get in touch with the intuition and voice that's coming from your body, do not ignore it. because there's no justification or mind games going on there. It's telling you the truth.
Yeah, that's such great advice. And guys, I'm just like, it's so interesting how real estate relates so much to other types of business as well. But like the whole time Adam was talking about that, I was just thinking about like if you are in a situation where you're thinking about taking on a client in your business, whether you're a copywriter, photographer, a website designer, and you're like, looking at the money, looking at their status, looking at how many followers they have, and you're like, oh, they'd be great. And you're just letting all of those things be the thing that's like defining whether or not you should take them as a client, but not going with your gut. That's when we run into all those situations where you're crying over the contract and you're trying to fire them as a client. Like this stuff applies everywhere. So like if you are in that situation, maybe even rewind back and listen to him say all that again and think about it from the perspective of your business right now, not a real estate business, because it all applies the same when we think about working with people. And something else I would add, Adam, is that like one thing, and I think you realized this and kind of changed it with later tenants, but not texting with tenants can be really helpful. And that also is back to regular business, guys. If you've been in Book.Designer or heard me,
there's a lot in therapy about this.
Yes, I've talked about this on my podcast of like setting boundaries with clients. I can link to an episode about that. But like, I'm a huge proponent of whatever type of business you're in, not opening that door. How you communicate with the client, you are literally teaching them how to communicate back with you. And so in real estate, if you text your tenant to be like, hey, how's the move-in day? Now, next time they need something and it's, 8 p.m. on Saturday night, they're going to text you about it and expect you to respond immediately because it's texting. They expect, the other people in their lives to respond immediately. So yeah, don't text with the people. So maybe even share a little bit about that, Adam, how that part relates.
You did a really good job there. I mean, there's not a lot else to say about it, but yes, I mean, the therapy world terminology we're talking about is boundaries. And the piece you're bringing in that's really good is like you're the one who creates the norms and shapes the culture of the relationship and the expectations. And if you're intentional about that, you can set it up in a way that makes sense. As Elizabeth is alluding to, I have not always done that. Like I've been a little bit too personable and not professional enough in some of these relationships with tenants that then led me into situations where it's like, you've got my personal cell phone number. You don't mind texting me at any time about something that is not important, which again would never, and it's one thing if they're calling me because there's water leaking, right? Yeah. That's a different situation. But things that's not actually essential, think about it like this. If this person lived in an apartment complex, what would they be doing? They would be filling out a contact form. Like they would not be talking to a person. They would be filling out a contact form that would then basically go through a triage process, right? Where someone who works at that property assesses the seriousness of it. Like, okay, there's water leaking. We need to get somebody down there right now, or the heat is out and it's winter. Or it's a light bulb and we're going to get somebody over there sometime, but not right now. Does that make sense? Yeah. I haven't always done a good job of creating that kind of relationship or creating habits that would set up that kind of relationship. I mean, a simple one that I'm trying to move everything towards is it's great to set up the norm of communication being over email, not phone. Like that's just a good starting place.
Yeah, and I mean, just to even put an example of like how that has created problems. I mean, there was one time in particular where there was a problem at one of the properties. You got texted about it on like Sunday morning with the urgency and expectation from the tenant that it would be fixed by the end of the day, even though we needed a specialized person to come out there to fix it, which is not going to be available just on a Sunday within a few hours to be done. And this was all being done over texting. Again, if you listen to last episode, we talked about how the real estate business is a great way to make money, and it's not a ton of work in a sense, but it's a lot of mental load. Like this is a lot of mental load. If you have tenants constantly emailing and texting you, being like, I need this thing, I need that thing, I have this problem. So that's, helpful there.
Totally. And there are things that you can do to try to create a relationship with better boundaries.
Yeah. So you want to go to the second one?
Yep. Number 2. Do you want to say it? You want me to say it?
Yeah, so the second thing is we want to share some, this is getting kind of weird on the order. The second thing is we have some resources we use now that we did not know about when we first started this business that have been super, super helpful. 3 things in particular. Yep. So this is kind of a sub-point of 3 things.
And we can be very fast here. So the first one was definitely not mentioned when we first did a few episodes about real estate last year, the year before, whenever that was. Turbo Tenant. This is a way to collect rent digitally without paying any fees. Okay, I looked for this for a long time. There are a lot of ways to collect rent digitally, not messing around with cash or check, but just debiting people's cards or bank accounts. There's plenty of ways to do that, okay? They're all over the place, and they all cost money because those are all businesses. But we had to look high and low for one that was very much reliable and a good product that there's no fee at all. It exists. It's called Turbo Tenant. If you do this, that's the resource you want to look up. That's the way you're going to collect money from people electronically without paying any money for it. And they have a whole business model. I mean, they're using that to try to get you in the door, and then they want to upsell you to a membership that offers all kinds of other services. You can do that if you want to, or you don't have to. I have not done that. So Turbo Tenant. Second one, we definitely did talk about this probably.
But I've used it more since.
Yeah, My Smart Move. It's just a great software to do the credit checks and to do the background checks, like criminal background checks. So that's My Smart Move. And again, that's not the whole process. Trust your gut too. And finally, this one's more of a tip than a resource. If you get into this, just create a document in your Google Drive or whatever where you keep a list of vendors. So there's a lot of different stuff that a house needs, okay? There's the electrical, and there's the plumbing, and there's the painting, and there's the yard, and there's the roof, and there's a lot of different stuff. So if you end up doing this, you need an electrician, you need a painter, you need a plumber. It'd actually be nice to have a couple of those in case one's price is too high or is not available. So this is not an urgent thing. You don't have to do this in order to get started, but once you get started, create a sheet where you start logging all of that. If you have a good experience with someone, like if you work with someone, it was a good experience, put their name in there and what they do, so-and-so, the electrician, here's their phone number. And a lot of times these people are running such bootstrapped kind of businesses that like you're never going to find it if you don't have their personal phone number. Like their personal phone number just being passed from person to person is the only way to get in touch with them.
Yeah.
Second thought on that, this is not really one of our tips, but I do think it's an important story. Always price check. And I don't just mean, okay, if it's a small job, if you're having an electrician come over to do something for $120, I'm not saying you have to shop that to 3 different electricians to save the $10 from someone who might do it for $110. Okay, I'm not saying that. But when you're having big work done, price check, price check, price check. I saved $2,000 by doing this earlier this year. So we had last year, 2022.
We're recording this at the very beginning of January, so it's like, wait, what year is it?
In 2022. So we had an HVAC go out. We had to buy a new HVAC. That got covered on the last podcast episode, what that kind of meant for the finances. The first phone call I made said $8,000. I'm not an HVAC expert, but I knew that sounded a little high. The second phone call for the exact same product, I mean the same brand, the same capacity, the same thing, $6,000. I mean, it's a $2,000 phone call. I made $2,000 by making the second phone call. Like, just price check. Like, it's worth it to do a little extra work, a Google search, a second phone number, just to compare rates.
Yeah, those are great tips. Okay, yeah, so that's our second thing. It's just those 3 resources. I mean, I'll link to all those in the show notes too, so y'all can just click over to them. Now, I know we're talking about real estate today, but I want to take a moment and talk about websites and how they relate to real estate. They do, at least for me, and perhaps it could for you too. So our real estate business is funded by this business, this podcast, my website template shop, my courses, all that kind of stuff. And we would have never had the money to invest in real estate had it not been for me first investing in my website and online presence overall. How you look online matters. If the picture's worth 1,000 words, then I'd say a good website is worth 1,000,000. Having a strong online presence has been a huge key to my business success. Seriously, when I think about like what's worked for me, that's been a huge part of it. And that's why I created my Show It website template shop, where you're going to find really fun, affordable, easy to customize website templates that are going to help you stand out in your industry and make more money online. Having a great website does not have to cost you thousands of dollars, weeks of your life. It does not have to cost you coding and headaches and crying on the phone with your domain host, any of that kind of stuff. Your website doesn't have to be frustrating or boring, and it does not have to be something you just have because you were told you're supposed to. It can actually be something you're proud of, and it can be the key to you making money online in a place that really represents you so well that you're like eager to send your potential clients and customers to. In fact, I'd say having a beautiful website can even motivate you to want more for your business. Just this morning, I was reading a new review that came through from one of my customers named Melinda. Shout out to Melinda. I think she listens to this podcast. But she was sharing that she actually wants to blog now and feels excited about blogging in her business and creating content because of her M-Shop template, because it looks beautiful, because the blog is awesome. Now she wants to do blogging. Amazing, right? So if you haven't cared much about your online presence at this point in your business, that's okay. But I really do believe in the power of this. I see it time and time again with my customers, and I'm a testament to this as well, that caring about your website helps you grow your overall business. So if you're considering upgrading your website this year, I highly encourage you to check out M-Shop. That's EM for Elizabeth McCravy Shop, and get your template there. So you can go to elizabethmccravy.com/shop to look at all my website templates. I have templates for a variety of industries, a variety of styles, sales page templates, podcast templates, so many options there. So go check it out. I hope you enjoy. And now back to my conversation with Adam. The third thing, I'm going to let Adam talk about this one. This is such a good tip. It might seem a little complicated, but you're really good at explaining all these to make them less. Adam's great at making all this stuff less complicated. But yeah, so buy for price, not for interest rate, which interest rate, gosh, that's such a hot topic in real estate, right? It has been for interest rates low, and now interest rates high. Interest rates are crazy right now.
So whiplash.
So yeah, explain what we mean by that.
Yeah, buy for price, not for interest rate. So when you are thinking about buying a rental property, this is kind of what that equation looks like. You're going to try to figure out what you can rent it for, and then you're going to subtract out of that whatever it's going to cost you each month. And the vast majority of what it's going to cost you is the mortgage payment. There are some other things, right? An HOA payment, some maintenance here, maybe some lawn care. I mean, there's other things. But the vast majority of what is determining your profits is what I can rent it for and what's the mortgage payment and what's the difference between those two things. Okay, well, a mortgage payment has two components, the price of the house and the interest rate. Those two things combined are going to make up the math that gives you what that monthly mortgage payment is. Here's what I'm getting at with this. That monthly rate can be higher or lower because of either of these factors being higher or lower, right? When you're making a decision to buy a property, obviously both have to be taken into account. But if there's one that you should privilege more than the other, it's the price of the property, not the interest rate. And for one simple reason, that's because interest rates can change.
You can refinance and all that to literally change your interest rate. Exactly.
Like when you buy a house, whatever interest rate you're getting locked in at, even if it's a high interest rate, it will never go higher. Like that is the highest you'll ever see. And at whatever point in time that the U.S. monetary policy lowers interest rates, then you get the opportunity to refinance. That may happen sooner, it may happen later, but it will happen at some point, okay? Price is frozen. I mean, what you bought the house for is what you bought the house for is what you bought the house for. And you might say, okay, Adam, but why does it matter if I paid a little too much for the house if the numbers still work? Like if my interest rate was so low that my monthly payment is so low that I still make money, why does it matter if I paid too much for the price? It will matter at the resale. Mm-hmm. Like that is money that you're losing in 5 or 10 or 15 years when you sell the house. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like, let's say you got a awesome interest rate, so you paid an extra $20,000 on the house and all the numbers still worked. That's fine if it's going to be your personal residence, by the way. That's totally fine. That is not fine for this business because so much of the money you're trying to make is the profits that you will cash in the future when you are selling a house that is now worth more than you bought it for, and if you overpaid on the front end, it really eats into that. So that's what's so bad about privileging an interest rate over price. I mean, personal story for us. So when we first started doing this, we were chasing interest rates.
Which still, to be fair, prices were also good on those early.
Right.
Which we had a really great situation because of that.
Right. So when we bought the first 3 of these back at the beginning of 2021, I mean, interest rates were at all-time, absolutely not exaggerating, fair to say historic lows. We all know this. So at that point in time, it might have made sense to chase the interest rate, okay? And also, prices still had room to run. So we were not at the peak of the market yet. There was still another 6 months to 12 months to 14 months of like price growth. So those purchases all worked, even though we were somewhat motivated by the interest rate for very specific circumstances that I just explained. It all worked out at that point. But I will say the reason I included this is because this past year, 2022, we made a mistake, not a catastrophic mistake, but I would still call it a mistake, on a house because of chasing interest rates.
And back to trusting your gut instinct. That was actually, and also back to two things, trusting your gut instinct and the mental load of this type of business. Adam was like...
in anguish.
Yeah, in anguish, truly, over this decision. I tried to help as much as I could on like helping him make the decision, and us both being in on it. But it was like a lot of like, okay, I'm not going to do it. I am going to do it. Mm-hmm. I think the people the whole time thought we were going to back out of the deal probably because we were like literally delayed on
flighty.
We were delayed on things like because we were flighty.
yeah, and that's probably because our gut was telling us not to do it, and we. But
I think it has worked out well right now, at least.
Yes, yeah. I want to be clear. So this is the Huntsville house. I'm talking about the house that we bought this year in Huntsville.
Which if you listen to last week's episode, you know what we're talking about because we walked through all the houses.
Yeah, the house we bought in 2022 in Huntsville. It's not a catastrophe at all. Okay, like I think that house is going to work out. I don't think it's going to be a home run. It's not going to be my favorite thing to think back on, but after some hold time, like with enough patience, like it's going to be a profitable decision. But I also don't think it's going to be a highlight reel either, if that makes sense. The reason is because we were chasing interest rates. So as you know, throughout 2022, interest rates were going up. We bought that house largely motivated by a desire to try to get one more house in while interest rates were still somewhat low. And we got a decent interest rate on that house. We had already moved past the historically low period of interest rates, but we still got a decent interest rate, definitely a couple percent lower than what they are today. But that was the guiding impulse, not what's the sell price or what's the list price? Is it a good deal? Do we think we're getting this for less than it's worth today? What do we think the housing market's about to do? Go up or down? Newsflash, it was about to go down. We weren't thinking about that as much, okay? Still not a catastrophic mistake. Huntsville is a great market. There's a lot of resiliency there. It's actually the kind of market you'd like to be in when the real estate industry turns down. A cheaper market, but still quality. So it's not a catastrophe, but nonetheless, I look back on it thinking, gosh, I wish we hadn't done that. And the reason we did it was chasing interest rates more than price.
Mm-hmm. And something, too, from this tip that you might have a little something to add to it before we move to the next, but like, if you are considering investing like right now or soon, that is a piece of advice to maybe let's stick with you of like not focusing like a deathly grip hold on interest rates, although that does still matter and could be a reason to deter you from investing depending on where you are in your market and all that. But not letting that be the only thing. And we talked about this in the last episode, but like if you got to take action at some point, mm-hmm. which means you can't let interest rates scare you away from ever doing anything.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think that was well said. I mean, the only thing I would add to it is obviously you have to think about the interest rate, okay? That determines a lot of the viability month over month of the business. I think the way I would say is like don't let the high interest rates be a conversation stopper. Like it doesn't need to be a conversation stopper. It definitely needs to be a factor and a consideration, but there are scenarios happening and will probably continue to happen as home prices go down more where, hey, even though the interest rate looks awful, the home price is starting to look good, this can still work with a potential refinance in the future.
Love it. Okay, let's share. So that was our first. We've done 3, and we have 4 more for you guys. So Adam, share number 4.
Number 4, wish I would have known more about how to calculate capital expense. And along with that, I wish I would have been thinking more about the age of HVACs in the houses that we were buying.
Woohoo, fun words.
Yeah, so these are kind of, it feels like it's 2 different tips in one, but it really is one because HVACs are capital expense. So I'm going to start by defining capital expense. Capital expense is real estate jargon for big picture renovations and rehabs that add to the value of the home. So this is not talking about repairs. Okay, this is not talking about a leaky faucet or, a broken cabinet. This is talking about remodeling that kitchen. Like that's kind of the difference. So when you're talking about remodels, appliances like your HVAC or the refrigerator or whatever, the hot water heater, anytime you have to have something painted, the roof is obviously the biggest one. That's all referred to as capital expense. And what's important to know about it, this is the sneaky thing that makes your profit margins worse than you think they are. Because these expenses are large and they don't hit every year, but when they hit, they're big, right? I mean, if it's a roof, it's 15 or 20 grand. If it's an HVAC, it's 6 grand. If it's a hot water heater, it's 2.5. You get the picture. So last episode, if you listen to it or not, we shared some of our cash on cash returns, which were all really great numbers. We had one house that did 16% or something like that in cash on cash return, which sounds awesome. But then you got to back out money from that for the capital expenses. There are these remodels and these roof replacements and these HVAC replacements off in the future that you have to understand is detracting from what looks like a really nice 16% return. Is this all making sense? Anything for me to clarify before I keep going?
No, that's good.
All right, here's how you calculate it, okay? You have to estimate what all of these items cost, and you have to estimate how many years they last, and then you just divide out. If you think that a roof on that house costs $20,000 and you think the roof is going to last 40 years, then you need to allot $500 a year to capital expense roof replacement. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or we'll do another one for an HVAC. If you think that HVAC is going, I'm going to make the numbers easy on myself. If you think that the HVAC is going to cost $6,000 and you think it's going to last 12 years, what does that compute to? $500 a year, right? And I know they're probably only going to last 10, all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to make the numbers easy. But you get what I'm saying? Like, this is how you calculate capital expense. So what did we just come up with there? Between the roof and the HVAC, we just came up with $1,000 a year in capital expense that you should be factoring into these profit margins. And you can do the same thing with remodels and the hot water heater and all that kind of stuff. And then whatever number you come up with how much needs to be spoken for future capital expense in a year, maybe $2,000. Okay, then you divide that by 12. So what does that give you? Whatever 2,000 divided by 12 is. That's how much you should be planning on per month profit actually having to disappear over time to go to these big picture repairs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know it is a confusing, and I'm not a big math person. Adam knows this, so it can feel a little confusing, but I do get what you're saying. Hopefully listeners do as well.
Yeah, and I think the reason that this is important, before we ever bought our first property, I was aware of capital expense, and I was aware that this was a thing, okay, that, I read enough books and listened to enough podcasts about all this, and I heard enough people say, hey, that profit margin is not your actual profit margin. There are these big looming expenses out there that you have to factor in. I knew that. What no one ever explained to me really clearly was how you do the math. Like that concept we just went over of like, great, what you do is estimate the cost and estimate the life expectancy and then do the math to figure out, okay, to own this property, it's going to cost me like $130 a month in capital expenditure over the next 30 years. Mm-hmm. Nobody explained that to me. I wish somebody had. It's a really great way to think about it.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Yeah, I think so.
And along with that, age of the HVACs. So when we bought those first 3 properties, especially back in the beginning of 2021, I just wasn't thinking much about the age of the HVAC. I knew it was important. I understand that that's an expensive repair. I think I was fixating more on the roof. Like I was thinking a whole lot about roofs. It's actually one of the reasons why we wanted to buy townhomes, because you don't own the roof. And I didn't ever want to be on the hook for a roof. It really lowers your capital expense, by the way. But and even the houses that we bought that did own the roof, I was thinking about the age of the roof. I was asking that question, and for some reason, I just wasn't thinking about HVACs that much. I think I was just more in the mindset of like, oh, $5,000 or $6,000. It is a big deal, but it's not nearly as big a deal as the roof. I'm so obsessed with the roof. Okay, well, 2 years into this thing, or a year and a half into this thing, I haven't bought a roof, but I have bought 2 HVACs. So gosh, those HVACs really snuck up on us. So that's something that's kind of sucked about the first year and a half. We have bought 2 HVACs. That is $12,000. Good news, even with all of that capital expense, because that's capital expense, that $12,000, even with so much of it being front-loaded to the first couple of years, we've still had solid profit, which is good. Mm-hmm. But I can look back on all of that and think, man, when we were negotiating those deals and making those offers, I wish I would have paid a little more attention to the fact that people were selling us houses with HVACs that were about to die.
And that is something you can negotiate in, like, when you do inspection and things of that nature, like asking for money because of that sort of thing. And people, if you have bought a personal property at some point, you also have had those same types of experiences of, like, looking at those things impacts what you see as the value of the home and if it's a fair price and all of that kind of stuff.
Totally. All right. I know we've been talking for a while, so we'll pick up the pace here.
We have 3 more to share with you guys. And I think these last 3
are going to go
are really, well, I was going to say are really good and a little less high-level mathy, but just more like practical.
Sure, they're not as technical.
Yeah, less technical.
Here we go. Next one. Do you want to say it?
Yeah, so it's harder and it takes more time to rent standalone single-family homes than townhomes. So, and there's more stuff that goes wrong with standalone homes.
Yeah, so a lot to say here, just kind of what we've learned about the difference between townhomes and standalone homes.
Yeah, it's real quick. So of our 5 properties, we have 3. Yeah, I was trying to remember. 3 that are townhomes, 2 that are standalone. And of the 2 that are standalone, one of them was our previous home. And it really is honestly, a large house for even being a rental that is a standalone property.
Right. Makes for a good rental because it's offset the living space, not veterans. But
yes.
Anyway. Yeah, so, man, we've only really had one time now that it took us a while to rent a house, and that was on the house that we used to live in. And that was a little bit of a new experience. It didn't sit empty forever, but it was about 6 weeks, which makes a big difference, okay? When a house rents for $2,500 a month, 2 weeks is a lost something like that. Around $4,000, a little less than that, $3,750. It's like when you watch 6 weeks of emptiness go by, I'm actually covering 0.7 even as I say this. Vacancy is a killer. So here, you're getting 2 for 1 in this. This is 0.5.
We'll combine these.
Yeah, when you're watching a house sit empty for 6 weeks, it is a lot of money out the door. That's what's called vacancy. In the case of this single family house that ended up renting for $2,500, it sits empty for 6 weeks. You're missing out on almost $4,000. It's a huge deal. So,
which is when it can start to just make more sense to lower the rent for less loss to get someone in it sooner.
Right. And there's a whole math calculation that goes into that of like, gosh, I really hate to cut the rent, but big picture, if I cut the rent $100, I just lost $1,200 for the year. But if I let it sit empty for another month, I'm going to lose $2,500 for the year. Like very quickly, it can start to make sense to just rent it for less, but rent it faster. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that was the first time that ever taken us a long time to get a tenant. Every other time, which was all townhomes, gosh, we filled that thing in like less than a week. It was awesome. Like vacancy was not even a thing. And we weren't offering crazy low rents. Like we were pushing for good rent. And it was still filling really quickly. And my theory is that it's just a lot easier to rent out townhomes and a lot harder to rent out larger standalone homes because of the types of people who are wanting to rent those 2 different things. Okay, so when you're talking about townhomes, you're talking about single people or maybe couples, without any children or pets, or even if it's a family, a smaller family, like you're talking about a different type.
Or if it's a larger family, you might not be planning to live there that long, which goes back to what he's about to say.
Yeah, that's a good take. Maybe it is a family or a larger family, but they don't think they're going to be there very long. The point is they're more transient. Like the type of person who's wanting to live in a townhome or a condo is a more transient person who, it seems to me, is probably picking this townhome mostly for location. Like it's near where they need to be for a short period of time, and they know what they're getting. They know it's going to be a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and they're like, great, but it's right beside my work. That's where I need to be right now, or it's in the right part of town while the house that I'm going to move into is being finished or whatever. So what that means is it's a less picky population. When you talk about someone who's less transient, more stable, who's wanting to live in a standalone house that might be a place that they see their family being for some amount of time and really putting down some roots, they're pickier. Like they're thinking about what the neighborhood is like, what the street is like, how much traffic there is. Do they like the yard? Is the yard big enough? Is the yard too big? Do they not want to have to cut that much grass? Like
the fixtures and wall color and even things like the finishes that you might not focus on as much in a townhome or apartment.
Right. So that's something we learned. Takes more time to rent those things out when you're planning for vacancy. Something else that we learned that's obvious, but now we've experienced it firsthand, there's just more expense that goes into standalone houses. Like Townhomes, here's all the things you're not thinking about. You're probably not thinking about the roof. It's probably the obligation of the homeowners association, and paying for the roof eventually is what some of your HOAs are going towards. You're not thinking about the yard. You're not thinking about anything on the exterior of the house, honestly. Even like the siding and all that kind of stuff is probably the responsibility of the HOA. So you're literally only thinking about the inside of the house. It's so much less. Whereas talking about the mental load that goes into these, so one of our standalone houses, I mean, I've spent, a considerable amount of time in my own mind thinking about the trees in the yard and the limbs that probably are going to need to be cut down eventually, the grass and how good it looks or how dead it looks, and, and the roof, and when the roof is going to have to be replaced.
And even talking about the grass and yard care, there have been many times where you have gone over to the properties and mowed the yard yourself.
Yeah, I wouldn't say many times. That's happened a couple of times. But yes,
but even still,
point.
That's something too you have to think about is the mowing of the yard the tenant's responsibility or is it yours? And if it's yours, then figuring out, are you the one driving over there and mowing it? Or we actually had a neighbor who we were paying to mow that, but we had it as the yard mowing, at least at that particular property, was on us.
Yeah, which we've changed that now, and now we're making leases that reflect it being the responsibility of the tenant. But that still doesn't alleviate you from caring how healthy the grass is.
Yeah,
you still have
if
to
they're
think,
just letting it go crazy and devalue the home.
Even if they're the one who's responsible for cutting it, you're still the one who cares about whether or not your grass is getting healthier or getting less healthy over time. So, but here's the point. All three of those things that I just said on that one house, that is what I think about the most: the trees, the yard, the roof. You're not thinking about any of that if it's a townhome. None of that is your responsibility. So, if there's a takeaway here, if you do decide to get into this, I like townhomes and associations. I think that if what you're after is more simple and easy, I think that is a pretty good strategy. Now, just full disclosure, there is also loss, okay? Standalone houses tend to appreciate faster. That is at least what conventional wisdom says. So in theory, there's more upside on a standalone house, but I'll tell you, there is much, much less month-over-month expense and stress and work in a townhome.
Yeah, and something to consider that is, this is true of townhomes as well, I guess, but not all houses and townhomes condos, all of them make sense as a rental. Back when we were saying it's different kinds of people in wanting different kinds of homes, but you could have maybe your first home you're thinking could be a good rental, but it might not actually be a good rental. And Adam kind of said this real quick, but our first house made a good rental even though it was a standalone, more square footage home, because so much of square footage was living space. It wasn't a ton of bedrooms. It was a 3-bedroom home, which makes it make more sense as a rental in the area it was in. Now, if you're talking about a rental right next to a college, then maybe a 5-bedroom house that has hardly any living space, that could make more sense. You have to think about the target market, the ideal customer, so to speak, for the property, and if that makes sense for it to be a rental.
Yep. Yeah, good point. It's not all about just the square footage, but how the square footage is being used.
Yeah. Okay, so let's share. So Adam tied 2 into that one of it's harder and slower to rent a standalone home, single-family home than a townhome, and vacancy is a killer of the finances of the property. You have to take that into consideration.
Yeah, the quick takeaway there is to remember that oftentimes you are better served to just rent it for a little less, but save time and vacancy.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the last one.
Last one. Woohoo.
Hey, this one's a good one, okay? This has been a positive.
This is a positive.
Rents really do go up.
Woohoo.
That's something that we heard a lot whenever we were doing the research and trying to get into this, listening to the podcast and the books. People would always say, hey, when you run your numbers, remember that rent number you're working with, it's probably the lowest it's ever going to be. Wait 3 years, wait 5 years, wait 1 year, and that number just gets higher. That's part of the equation that makes real estate make so much sense. It's true. It's true. Okay. So we've raised rents at all of our properties. We've never not raised rents. The rent has gone up every time a new lease was signed. It hasn't always gone up maybe by as much as I wanted it to go up. Okay, there's some negotiating. Let's say the same tenant's going to sign a second lease. We throw out a new number. There's some negotiating there.
That's even back on good tenants. Sometimes if it's a really good tenant, you're hey, you've been great living here.
Totally.
We'll rent it for less to keep you versus losing you and getting someone who might not be as good of a tenant.
Totally.
Anyway.
Yeah, but the big picture takeaway here is that advice is not it's not untrue. Like, it is true. Like, this is an industry where, like every other industry, by the way, just like everything that you buy really does increase in price. The same is true with rent. Like, if you do find yourself as a real estate investor, those numbers where you're calculating the profit, they do just get better year after year after year as you're able to raise the rent, which we have experienced, and it really does happen and work, but your expenses stay fixed because your mortgage is fixed. That's one of the many things that makes up the magic of real estate. Your income gets to go up, but your expenses get to stay fixed. So what looks like a 10% return in year one can just turn into a 12% return, and a 15% return, and a 20% return if you're patient and you stay in it long enough.
Yeah, love it. Okay, so yeah, those are the 7 things we've learned, you could say, through these 5 properties. And I would love to know from you guys, if you enjoyed this episode, send me a message. I can share it with Adam. You can email me or send me a DM on Instagram at Elizabeth McCravey, and we'll probably do some more episodes soon on real estate investing. We have another one we've already thought of.
We're doing one more for next week, right?
Well, no, we might not do another one right now.
Oh, we're not doing another one right now.
We might. We'll see. Keep you on your toes. I'm a little tired of talking right now. I'm not someone who can podcast for 1,000 years. We've done 2, but yeah, the one you heard last week, we also recorded right before this. But yeah, we literally had a night a few weeks ago where we were sitting up, we were having some drinks, talking, and then we were like, oh, we need to like do some episodes about this. And I, as you do as a business owner, typed into my phone like, oh, these cool ideas. And then funny thing, whenever we do this other idea, I actually like hit record on like the voice recorder app and just recorded Adam talking about one thing. We're like, oh, we should make that episode. Let's just talk about it. So we're going to do another episode talking about like why we've happily invested in real estate and like some thought process around that, maybe versus like stock market and crypto and some other types of investing. So that's another one to come.
Forthcoming at some point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for being a guest as always.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Love you.
Love you too.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode all the way until the end. I appreciate you being here. And if you enjoyed this episode, then I want to invite you to check out my website template shop too. Over on elizabethmccravey.com, you'll find show it website templates that are easy to use, strategically designed, and created to help you book more clients and customers. Maybe your current website is really boring. Maybe it's a challenge to update, and maybe even it's that thing that you really feel like is just completely holding your business back. Your website needs to be strategically and intentionally designed in order for it to convert your viewers into raving customers, and that's exactly what my M-Shop templates do. So these are pre-made show it website templates where you can plug and play your content into it with ease and then get started with a website that's designed to actually help you make more money. These templates are designed to be SEO friendly on the back end, and they're not just pretty, but they are very strategic and with all the strategies I teach on this podcast. And best of all, they're easy for you to set up all by yourself. So shop them at elizabethmccravey.com/shop and come join the M-Shop family of hundreds of happy customers. And as an added perk, you can use the code BBPodcast at checkout to get 10% off any template as a thank you for being a part of the podcast family. So that's BB Podcast for 10% off any template over at elizabethmccravey.com. And if you love this podcast, don't forget that you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts so that you never miss an episode, and leave a rating and review for the show wherever you're listening. Share it with a friend, share it on Instagram or Facebook. That's a great way to support the podcast and get the word out. All right, I'll be back next week with another new episode.